Alright, so Pierce is talking about modernity now. And modernity has to do with some of the things we're already thinking about, right? We're thinking about factories, we're thinking about how people are starting to become more mobile, right? Well, that is part of what Pierce is illustrating in this article. And that is, with modernity, we had a shift from agriculture to industrialism. We also had a shift in truth and knowledge, as it was strictly controlled by clergymen and religious leaders. Well, it shifted with modernity, and now there's this kind of liberating, you know, access to to truth and to knowledge. Well, also, and this is what he really focuses on in the article, also there's this shift in technology. And while we see technology, shifting in ways of factories and travel and all that, he focuses on this technology of communication. And a very interesting concept because communication indeed did shift, and he lays out how that shift happened, and that communication became this technology, this tool, if you will. He lays out a very basic structure to begin with, that epistemology, or ways of knowing, what he really focuses in on, it's really his key point in this whole article, is just epistemology, of ways of knowing, what we are, who we are, just ways of knowing. And then he lays out this model of psychological, sociological, and cosmological factors filtering into our epistemologies and, solidifying that's on foundation. And one example of this is the nuclear family. Now, the nuclear family is where you have a father and a mother and children, right? Living together in the home. Prior to modernity, wasn't necessarily the case. You didn't have families like that. If we go back to hunters and gatherers and all that. But with that shift in communication, you have the nuclear family. So that's one structure he outlined. Now, he continued to talk about modernistic communication in another model, and what he calls the strange loop of modernity. And since we're talking about it in terms of technology, he uses a very good way to illustrate this model, and that is through the scientific method. Now, the scientific method is where we take a hypothesis, right, and we try to prove that it's false, right? So, he applies some of the major concepts we've been talking about of coherence and mystery. Now, this is the awesome part, because he applies these concepts to the scientific method. So when we take that hypothesis, what we're really doing, as he describes, is we're taking a story and we're calling it into question. Now, that involves the coherence part, right? We're disrupting the coherence of that story, and we are suspending our belief from it in order to change it and create a new story, which is part of the mystery, that we are letting go and we're trying to find this new story or this new fact, and we find it, and that's the mystery aspect. Now, once we find this new story, we celebrate that discovery, and that is what that loop is of modernity. Now, it's called the strange loop because this new story actually becomes the old one, right? And then once you find, let go of that and work it to change it, and you get a new one. And then it continues that cycle. So that is this technology of communication that Pierce is talking about. And he implies that there are three major things that's going on in this process, and that is that truth is rational, meaning truth is not absolute, right? It is relative. And that change counts as progress, okay? And third, that self-worth is achieved by being the agent of change. Now, after that, after he presents this model, he kind of picks away at it and criticizes how it's imperfect. Like a lot of technologies, they're flawed, right? And just like how we talked about earlier in the course, that language and words and gestures, they are problematic, right? They are imperfect, they're flawed. And so is this technology of communication with modernity. And so he talks about how there's this disillusionment of modernity, and he talks about how there's there's these happy modernists, or those who are satisfied with this strange loop, and it's not good. It's what it really is just false consciousness, if you will, of these happy modernists operating in this strange loop. And he lays out and says, you know what, wait a minute, this is what's really happening. What's happening is we have our epistemology, right, our way of knowing. And what's happening is these other factors, psychological, sociological, and cosmological, are filtering into our epistemology and then springing out and then reinforcing them. And it's continually, it's changing, but it's looping around and reinforcing. Rather than that first model of it just reinforcing it and solidifying that foundation, it's actually springing out of it and reinforcing it. And some of the problems he's saying with the previous model is that, one, self-worth is, the only value is the newness that we're celebrating. There actually is no value to that new story. Another one is this deep mystification that you're operating, that false consciousness. So, essentially, this communication is flawed. It's not perfect. And Pierce says at the end that, maybe there is a solution to fixing it. But he suggests that we shouldn't deliberately try to fix it. Rather, we should work it out in our social practices, in communication. And that is what Pierce talks about, and is awesome. Alright, thanks, bye.